Hello again team, it's Jess or JashiiCorrin and welcome back for another video. Today we're looking at how I'm doing my planning for teaching in the year ahead. I'm using a combination of my bullet journal, Notion and Excel to do this, but before we jump in to look at that, I'm just going to cover how my teacher planning last year has influenced what I'm doing this year. Throughout the video, I'm going to be referencing a couple of other videos I have, so make sure to check out the description box below for those. Last year I had this Erin Condren teacher planner, and honestly, when it arrived, I was so excited because it's gorgeous, it's high quality, and I was really looking forward to jumping into it. Although there were things that I certainly did like about this planner, there were also things that I did not. I really loved that on any given week there was plenty of space for me to use, so space to record what I needed to do for each lesson, reminders, things that were going on outside of my lessons. My personal preference is to have days running down the page rather than across, but I did make my peace with this. As I said, this journal has really good quality paper, which was really nice to write on. I also really enjoyed using the stickers that came with the planner and the extra ones that I bought as well. I don't really use a whole heap of stickers in my bullet journal, so getting to use them in here was a bit of fun. Because I wasn't sharing my teacher planner online in the same way that I share my bullet journal, I also didn't have to worry about having confidential information in there. It also meant that I could be a bit more relaxed about being messy, because I didn't have to have that Instagram aesthetic. That's not to say that I didn't make it look nice for myself, but I didn't have that added pressure. Those were some of the positives about this planner, but I also found I didn't really write anything confidential in here anyway. Things like student notes go on our learner management system, and things like grades I record in other ways, but we'll talk about that later. There were also a lot of sections that I just did not use. Some of them I could repurpose, like the student checklists that I have here, which I turned into topic planners, but most of them ended up just being left blank. I also found that doing teacher planning in a monthly style planner doesn't really work for me either. I'd much rather have full-term layouts than monthly calendars. I also didn't really like the coil, and that's mainly because I stood on the coil and bent it. I know that's user error, but it still bummed me out every single time I looked at it. Another issue that I found with this planner is that it's honestly just way too big for me. Part of the reason that I love my bullet journal, which is an A5 size, is that it's easily transportable. I didn't like transporting this planner because both in terms of surface area and weight, it's just too big for me. The biggest issue with having a separate teacher planner for last year though, is that it really discouraged me from using my bullet journal. I found that by pulling my teaching related tasks and events out of my bullet journal, it really just felt like the only things that were left were housework and chore related tasks. I know that wasn't strictly the case, I did have events with friends and social media related stuff in there, but with the majority of my tasks being taken out in particular, it almost made using my bullet journal feel like I was wasting time. Like, why are you working on your bullet journal when you should be working on your teacher planner? It's kind of hard to describe, but essentially, having a teacher planner made me neglect my bullet journal, which really kind of just bummed me out. I gave the Erin Condren teacher planner a good college try though. I used it up until about mid-September before I decided it really wasn't for me. At that point, I was really getting into Notion, and started experimenting with how I might use this for teacher planning. One of the pages I made was a table of revision videos for my students while they prepared for their final exams, and I also made another type of page that we'll talk about in the next section, but that one in particular I used to sort out all of my lessons for the rest of the school year. In terms of planning in my bullet journal for teaching last year, the only real layouts that I had were term planners. I did find these really useful for term 3 and 4 though, just so that I could see at a glance when everything was happening. You can see that although at the start of the year I had intended on just having my teacher planner for all of my teaching related plans, by the end of the year it did very much end up being a bit of a hybrid system. I learned some things about how I like to plan though, and I've brought them forward to this year. So, how am I doing my teacher planning now? Given that having my personal stuff, separate from my teaching related stuff, didn't really work last year, I've decided to recombine my personal and teacher planning into my bullet journal. This one is the A5 Archer and Olive Vintage B notebook, and I have very much been enjoying using it so far. Along with any of the teaching related tasks I have on my weekly layouts or in my monthly setups, I also have pages at the back of my journal, namely a year at a glance and my term scheduler. I'll also be setting up term overviews for terms 1 and 2, but having a look at the year at a glance, this is a space for me to see quickly when our term dates are, when we have staff only days, and also for me to track the number of sick days I have. I always find it kind of hard to get a feel for whether I've taken hardly any sick days at all, or quite a lot, during any given period of the year. The way I mark these on the year at a glance though is just with the colours I've listed at the top, so going over the days in question with those colours just as I'm doing here. Typically I'd mark out all of the holiday breaks in a year, but I'm a bit worried about doing that, just as our term holidays actually moved last year because of the pandemic. The next page type I have for teaching, and that I really enjoy using, are my lesson scheduler pages. I've got a separate video on this one, but the general way it works is that each column is a week for the school term, and each of the larger rows is a weekday. So for instance, this would be week 4, this would be Monday week 4, Tuesday week 4, week 5, Monday week 5, Tuesday week 5, etc. Each of the smaller rows are for individual periods. So if this is Monday, we have Monday of week 4, periods 1 through 6, Tuesday of week 4, periods 1 through 6, Wednesday of week 4, periods 1 through 6, and so on. Each of those smaller boxes I fill with a colour to represent what class I have. Obviously they aren't filled in yet, just as I don't have my timetable yet, but this is essentially what that one's going to end up looking like. So colours to represent all of my classes, and then I just write in a title for each lesson. As I prepare the materials for any given lesson, I can give the box a half cross, and then once the lesson is over, I can fully cross it out. In that way, it also kind of gives me a visual representation of our progress through the term. But this would hands down be one of my favourite teaching layouts. Another page type that I've previously found really helpful in my bullet journal were these topic planning pages. The way they work is that I have each lesson written out down the left-hand side, and then the common tasks for each lesson along the top. Once each task is done for each lesson, I can just mark off the relevant box in this section here. I really love these layouts honestly, but I'm looking to make something that's a bit more robust this year, so something that I can record a bit more information on. Also, in having a fair few new courses that I'm teaching, I wanted whatever it was that I'm using to be easily editable without essentially making a mess. This leads us to how I'm using Notion to plan. This page is my new version of that topic planning bullet journal layout. As you can see, it's built in a similar way, so we have a column for the lesson number, a column for what the lesson's actually on, and then along the top we have all of the things that I commonly do for lessons, with checkboxes to tick them off as they happen. Each of these lessons can also be turned into its own individual page though. So in here I can list things like the content I want to cover, any reminders, or anything else. I've also got my teaching schedule for each week in Notion as well. This is the main way that I organised my lessons in the later part of last year, so I figured it would be good to continue to build on that system. Essentially how it works is that I have 2 templates for each of my weekly timetables, and then I can press on whichever one I need for a given week. This will give me an unpopulated version of this page. Although it's a bit of a double up from my lesson scheduler that I have in my bullet journal, on this one I can record a lot more information. What I'm likely also going to do is link each of the lessons that I have on this page to those pages that I showed you before in my topic planning pages. But it's something to play around with when school starts back. So for instance, if my Year 11 Phys Chem class was doing that Welcome to Chemistry introduction, we could just pop that in there so then I can go directly to that page and see what I wanted to cover. That was a fairly brief overview of how I'm using Notion for teacher planning, but I do have a video coming out in a couple of weeks that's a bit more of an in-depth look at how Notion works. If you are interested in seeing that one, do make sure to subscribe to my channel, then you're way more likely to make sure you don't miss out. This leads us into how I use Excel though. Not strictly planning, but Excel is still a main component of my system, in particular the markbooks that I make for each of my courses. I do actually already have a video on this one, linked above and in the description box. Comment below if you were one of the people who watched the first version of that video before I re-uploaded it. If you were, you'll know what I'm talking about. The way it works though is that I have one of these documents for each of my courses that I teach. So for instance, last year I had one for Year 12 Chemistry, one for Year 11 Biochem, one for Year 11 PhysChem, and one for both of my Year 8 Science classes. I have one per course rather than one per class, just to help simplify things. And also as a way to make it easier to compare any of the data I'm collecting if necessary. Each of these though has a place to record grades and notes for each student in each topic of the course. It also has an overview page so I can see at a glance how the students are tracking across all standards. I've set these ones up so I need to do the least amount of data input possible. So there's a bunch of different formulas to auto-total things and auto-assign grades, so I don't have to think about it. I've also set up Excel markbooks for my entire department to use, just so we can easily see how every student is tracking in all of their science courses. This also makes it easier for our head of department to access this information, and if a teacher were to leave partway through the year, it's easy for their replacement to know where the students are at. Question of the day for you guys though, what does your planning system for your work look like? Do you use just one journal, or do you use multiple things in tandem? My bullet journal, Notion, and Excel. That is how I'm planning for my teaching work this year. Thank you for watching, team. If you liked today's video, please do make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to see more on planning, productivity, and personal development. Until next time, bye!